So, this edition of the Qur'aan television channel, being broadcast under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions, this is scheduled at 8:30 GMT, but we are broadcasting 10 minutes earlier. And this is the edition that is coming a day after we didn't broadcast anything on Monday. So we will make up some of it, some of the updates that we would have included. Now, the two items that are dominating the UK so-called domestic issues being given extreme priority by the usually corrupt, usually racist, usually right-wing, usually anti-Muslim so-called Fleet Street, so-called British press, so-called British national papers. One is the scum owned by dirty digger Rupert Murdoch, has got an opinion piece headed European far right marching to power in smart suits, not in bobber boots. Now, it's not a piece that they are running with any regret. They are celebrating. And the two words far right is completely misleading. It's fascist. Far right is not nearly accurate enough a description of the fascist movement that they are celebrating and promoting. And the one that they are focusing on, they're putting the comparative higher importance to, is the Spanish criminal who is being within the piece, and I'll use that within quotation marks, credited. He's the chief feature writer, the byline given to Oliver Harvey on this scum. And in the second paragraph, he writes, seen as his nation's Donald Trump, he is keen to wrest Gibraltar from British hands and has called for an end to the Muslim occupation of Spain. He is the leader of the Vox party. Vox is, of course, the Spanish for people. It's very similar to the Fox in German. The Vox party leader was heralded as Spain's potential political kingmaker before Sunday's general election delivered a hung parliament. And it says in a downbeat paragraph, Fox actually lost seats compared to 2019, yet it's still Spain's third biggest party, attracting around 3 million votes. Now, on the top of this piece, the main lead banner is as Spanish Trump waits in wings. Now they're representing Trump as a sane, rational, reasonable, objective, fair, etc. person, which is the opposite of what Trump is. But they've got anti-Muslim Sweden's Jimmy Ekson, and then it's Finland's Rika Pura, an Italian fascist Giorgia Meloni, and Frances Marine Le Pen and Greece's Vasilis Stigas. And there is no criticism of any of the policies, there is no criticism of their policies in any way being linked to the lack of rights for the ordinary people, the ordinary voters in the country. And each of these, let's say 5 countries that they are promoting, have got serious deficits in terms of basic citizens' rights, basic economic rights, basic social rights. And the editorial that they have there are 4 editorial pieces under the Sun says, and it's the first one is about, of course, against the European Union, and the second one is the low rate of burglary prosecutions or actions, and the third one is against a Muslim terrorist called London Bridge terrorist Usman Khan, and the fourth one is the new agenda. We suppose we should welcome Labour finally beginning its plan to let anyone legally self identify as different gender. So it's the gender thing that they're commenting on. Now, the question they put in the item mad dogs, of course, mad dogs should not be used because that is a generalization of dogs as being mad and capable of being mad. That is an cruelty based abuse of language and assault on the majority, overwhelming majority of the animals that are harmless. So they're talking about the parole given to Usman Khan's co-plotter named as Nazam Hussain. Nazam Hussain has already been freed once. Then a weapon was found in his home, at his home. Did no one learn from that? Now that question, did no one learn from that, is best put to the Murdoch scum. Aren't they learning anything from the Nazis, from the massacres and the tremendous amount, tremendous amount of human rights violations that are taking place under the pretext of protecting patriotism in right across Africa and Asia. And the majority of the people who are seeking so-called asylum in Western countries are victims of fascistic, right-wing, anti-democratic policies being allowed by the West to be pursued by the regimes in control, whatever the legitimacy level, across Africa and Asia. But then they're not talking about any of that. So they are celebrating the very thing that they otherwise claim to be opposed to. I mean, the biggest priority that the scum and the conservatives and the Pudul Sunak have put is on the alleged threat by the asylum seekers. Now that is magnifying to 99% the 1% that is the actual issue. The consequence of the people seeking asylum in Britain represents even less than 1% of the consequences caused by the British policies right now that have been pursued in the countries of origin. And there is nothing, no word of criticism about Keir Starmer about the fact that he is completely maintaining silence on that. Now, on the front page of the Daily Mail, which has got a so called special investigation, well, the main star is of had lawyers to make fake asylum claims. Now, and they give an example. And the picture they print with that story looks like somebody with an Indian origin name. And I am always curious why these criminals put on beards like that. Because beards, in terms of faith and religion, beards are numerically overwhelmingly associated with Muslims. The images of Muslim terrorists are more often than not images of bearded individuals who are allegedly the Muslim terrorists. So when they put an image of somebody who is not a Muslim, in fact, who is likely to be fiercely anti-Muslim generally, with a beard and doing something like the charging of £10,000, up to £10,000, to fabricate an asylum claim, visually that actually perpetrates and perpetuates the image of Muslims being bad and involved in bad things. Earlier in the week, earlier in the last, let's say, in the last 5 6 days, there was another one who was a London-based so-called photographer based in West London, and he is a Tamil, or his name is Tamil, and he was convicted and imprisoned for nearly raping a woman, a Chinese national, as they call him. He too has the beard. Anyone who doesn't actually have the time or the interest or the concentration of mind and attention to look at the actual stories, visually speaking, they would think that these are Muslims, which takes this commentary back to the London transport, the Transport for London, DLR, underground, overground advertisements of alleged terrorists. If you look at the image or the images that they've been running for the last, I would say at least 7 8 years that I've noticed, the images are based on the ethnic characteristics of what would be associated with significant parts of Pakistanis, both the male ones and the female ones. That's one side. And these are the ones, the images that are supposedly in the depiction, those of the suspected suspects, let's say, or likely suspects. And the person or persons who are alerting the Transport for London or the Transport Police are those of Chinese. Think about that. So the Chinese are running a propaganda, masterminding a propaganda that is vilifying and demonizing Muslims and Pakistanis. If you look at the subcontinent, or if you look at the Narendra Modi and Joseph Biden against China, you wonder what is going on. China is being depicted increasingly as having spies in the UK Parliament, in the British government, in various strategic positions, including in parts of the UK spying outfit. And yet, here is the Chinese being given the lead positive image of the innocent and of the anti terrorists. And the suspected terrorists are Muslims, Pakistanis. So, going back to the Daily Mail's investigation, it says the Mail's undercover reporters expose UK immigration law firms that brief clients on what lies to tell to win the right to stay in Britain. Now, the immigration law firms should not be doing illegal things, should they? But the law trade, as I have said on the evidence, licensed law traders are licensed criminals. 98% of the licensed law traders are criminals. And that includes 98% of the criminals who, after a certain period, as practicing criminals, are recommended and are recruited to various ranks of the UK judiciary. And there is no regulation, there is no actual audit of licensed law traders as to whether they are doing the right thing or the wrong things. And you can extrapolate that to cover all aspects of the law traders' trade. And it says lawyers are charging thousands of pounds to submit false asylum and human rights claims for illegal immigrants. If you look at the building complex that is called the East London Mosque on the Whitechapel Road, you cannot miss some of the signboards belonging to law firms. And all of these law firms, so called, are operated by operatives who are of Bengali descent, Bangladeshi descent, in fact. They're not from West Bengal in India. And these are operatives that are fleecing the people who are vulnerable to immigration law restrictions and so on. These are not law practitioners that actually uphold the principle of access to law. They don't. They're strictly and oppressively charging huge sums of money. And because the legal bureaucracy in this United Kingdom is allowed impunity from accountability, any lawyer who has got a license to practice as a lawyer or practice law trade, if he or she fails to deliver to the clients, then there is no recourse for the clients for the failures and the negligence and the incompetence and the dishonesty. So, whatever the Daily Mail has uncovered should be multiplied 1,000 times or several thousand times. And the lawyers don't have to pay, they don't have to account, they don't have to be held to account. They are impune, they're given impunity. The only case that really remains on the records as being about the any level of liabilities and accountabilities that any licensed law trader can be subjected to is the case called Saif Ali versus Sidney Mitchell. And that ended with a negative outcome for the victim of the scam run by the solicitors, barristers. Saif Ali was, of course, a Pakistani then, East Pakistani, I suppose, when he started. And there is no tendency, there is no trend, there is no record of licensed law traders being held to account. It actually brings to mind what I noticed at the university in the 1960s in East Pakistan. I was I was doing a degree in economics. And one of the lecturers, absolutely, one of the lecturers was so stupid. He would come to the lectures. I mean, he was an East Pakistani, let's say, because it was East Pakistan. And this guy didn't know what he was saying in the spiel that he actually mouthed. So he must have memorized something. And then he came to the lectures and he was memorizing chunks of what he must have memorized and he was delivering them. It was nothing to do with the intellectual ability of what constitutes various aspects of the theory or applied economics. It is like the rickshaw, rickshawalas in Dhaka, the rickshawalas who have been doing business as rickshawalas in Dhaka for a considerable number of years and have had as passengers English speaking tourists or people visiting Dhaka who were English speakers. And some of the rickshawalas would pick up paragraphs after paragraphs of the speeches. It is the sound that they memorized, not the actual meaning. So when they had, say, a non-English speaker as a passenger, and they wanted to intimidate or put pressure on that particular passenger by showing how they, the rickshaw pullers, were intelligent and intellectually superior to the passenger, they would deliver chunks of these memorized bits of the conversation, which made no tail or sense at all, because the bits that they memorized, and this is an original account I'm giving, bits that they memorized had something, a different context, different reference altogether. So it's like the British newspapers delivering to the people completely unrelated propaganda. And the people being zombified and capable of being zombified, prone to be zombified, are also the people in the context of England, little English. So they don't care what they are reading and they are absorbing all of it, the superficiality of it as the reality. And compared to this overwhelming parade of lies on everything, you look at Starmer, who is the political murderer of the Labour Party, which we use as the political murderer to mean that he is denying the public, denying society the option, the alternatives, the program, the policy alternatives that the country is crying out for. Now, back to the Daily Mail on the front page, there is this piece about Nigel Nasty Farage. They are saying, as BBC reporter apologizes over false Farage story, how long can NatWest boss alleged to be the source survive? Now, this is about the Simon Jack story that got a bit, only a bit of the fact wrong, let's say. And the BBC has been under pressure from all the right wingers and all the liars. And the BBC has, of course, caved in. The BBC reporter apologize over false Farage story. How long can NatWest boss alleged to have been the source survive? Now, this is being amplified on page 5, and the picture of the under pressure NatWest boss's Dame Alison Rose, and the reporter who got it wrong is business editor of the BBC, Simon Jack, and of course, the very grateful Nasty Farage reacted yesterday. Now, there is no evidence, absolutely no evidence that the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph, the Times, or Rishi Sunak or the Conservatives have got any interest in the real access to banking for ordinary people. And as I said, we shall be running essay length, world exclusive original stories, investigation stories about the criminality of banking. Because to delve into the actual details of the banking corruption and criminality will take hours, which is impractical for a program of this description that we are running now. There is no reference to any level of banking denials. Let's look at the reality. What banking actually is not a one off thing. Access to banking is a daily necessity, nothing short of the access to breathing air, because everything has to be done by banking. You have to have a card or you have to have a bank account. You cannot transact most things, you cannot do that without having a bank account. And there is no mention of that. And when it comes to Farage, he is not actually in any way comparable to those people who are denied banking facility, banking service, access to banking at all. Farage is the mother of congenital lying. If Boris Johnson is the congenital liar who is now ousted, the nasty Nigel Farage is the mother of congenital lying. And they are promoting Farage. And Farage is the criminal that has been proven wrong on every single thing. So the fact that the BBC's Simon Jack has been forced to apologize is a victory, not for the truth and the evidence or the facts. It's a victory for the brigade that wants to have a go at the BBC. And anything that is critical of nasty Nigel Farage's racist, fascist, criminal agenda and criminal role that he plays. Now, they've got this two-page spread plus the column by Little John about the solicitors in the Daily Mail. And this individual, this Indian named solicitor, soul cheater, I call them, according to this report, has confected a story about a likely political exile. So you are a political exile, trafficked, sexually tortured, enslaved, and in fear of your life. The cynical story spun by legal advisor who even gave reporter antidepressant pills to show home office as evidence of trauma. £5,500 in cash for a pack of lies. Don't admit you came here to work. They will send you back. So this is a piece, which is continuing from the page 1. This is a two-page spread on pages 6 and 7. So there is this other one who is given the caption Booming Business, Rashid Ahmad Khan. Now, what is this Rashid Ahmad Khan doing? This is in Martin, southwest London, tucked in between corner shops, cafes, and dry cleaners. Scores of young men wait outside Rashid and Rashid's solicitors. This one looks like a Pakistani one. Some queue for as long as 5 hours for an appointment with Rashid Ahmad Khan, who operates on a strict first come, first served basis. And one thing is clear, business is booming. Inside his office, where a large bust of black Albanian eagle sits proudly alongside the stacks of legal files, Mr. Khan asks detailed questions about why our covert reporter, that is the reporter that investigated him as well, as an illegal immigrant from India, came to Britain. And the question is, within quotation, what was the problem you were facing back home? Political? Probed the solicitor, who has been practicing since 2009 and now has two branches for his firm. No, not political, just work. I needed a job, our reporter replied. Mr. Khan whispered his response. You said this, that, and they're going to send you back. Over the following half hour, Mr. Khan agreed to help file an asylum claim to the Home Office for a cost of £4,000. He asked our reporters, one illegal migrant, the other as his UK based uncle, to write down the reasons why he was no longer safe in India. Only minutes after, he was informed that there were none. You write one page and bring it to me. I'll turn it into 4 pages, Mr. Khan said. At one point, he tells our reporter to make up something about immigration authorities. While Mr. Khan appears to be cautious at times, on one occasion, telling our covert reporter he can't help him apply for asylum if he doesn't say his life is in danger back home, the solicitor still tells him to lie to the Home Office. Speaking discreetly in Punjabi, Mr. Khan says, just write why he's come here illegally, like he's taken a loan from someone who that party is. See, everyone who enters illegally has a reason, some political reason, some fight with someone. He will have to write these things to make up some story. If he doesn't say anything, he will get nothing. Our reporter later tried to clarify what he should write down, asking, a political problem? Mr. Khan responded, political, yes, anything. Just take name of a party. The solicitor said he would apply if the case was rejected and take the fight to court, adding, I've dealt with many people like him. This is the Khan story, not the other one, the Indian one. Approached by the mail, Mr. Khan denied that he or his firm offered to help an illegal immigrant submit fabricated asylum claim to the Home Office. He said, we are always advising people according to their circumstances under immigration rules and outside immigration rules, human rights. I always act with integrity, honesty, according to my code of ethics. He said the £4,000 cost he quoted the undercover reporters included extensive fees to the Home Office and other authorities, and his charge was only £1,000 of this amount. Now there are three individuals faces there. The other one is Malik Nazar Hayat. Malik Nazar Hayat boasts his Lincoln lawyers Lawrence solicitors firm is among the leading immigration lawyers in London. On his LinkedIn page, he says, we are experts in UK immigration law and advise on all UK immigration related matters. When the Mail advised his office in Hounslow, West London, asking for his expertise, Mr. Hayat quickly got down to business. Decked out in a sharp suit and chunky silver watch, he relaxed into his chair as he fired a series of questions at our reporter, posing as an economic migrant. Where is he from? In India. Does he have any debts or enemies? Any political affiliations? Has he ever been arrested? No, no, no. He's a man of good character, not political. Our second reporter posed him at his uncle, as his uncle responded. But we don't need a good character for asylum. If he's good character, he will ask him to go back. They will not accept his claim, Mr. Hayat said. Later he added, obviously, he's a good person. If he wants to stay here, he must have fear of prosecution back home, and etc. etc. Now, what this Daily Mail is doing is not this is not an investigation into the actual people who are victims, who have been really desperate to leave their place of persecution, country of persecution. Nothing in this two-page spread is anything to do with those people, anything to do with the actual number of people that are being starved by Suella Braverman, for example. Because the court decision yesterday was that Suella Braverman denying people the food was, of course, illegal and against the code that she's under legal obligation to observe and honor. So, the representation of the actual asylum situation is as false as they are claiming that these dodgy solicitors are. And the same thing applies to every aspect of the British media, for example. They're talking about the BBC apologizing to the nasty Nigel Farage for the alleged error by the BBC reporter Simon 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 Jack about Farage's data. But there are millions of people's personal data being abused by the banks, abused by the local councils, abused by the UK central government departments, and there is no mention of any of them. So we go back to the issues in due course. Then we move to the absolutely unbelievable praise in today's papers for the Sri Lanka born George Alagaya. George Alagaya is being uniformly praised by the Fleet Street and the provincial papers as a brave, talented, brilliant, kind, humane person. Now, what happened to transform him into all of these? Since 1981, when he was aged 26, he was placed at the Victoria Park Square, just above the Bethnal Green underground station off the Roman Road, when he was aged 26, because according to the accounts, he was born in Sri Lanka in 1955. So if he was born in Sri Lanka in 1955, then in 1981 he would have been 26 years old. And as we've said, we shall be running world exclusive, analytical, factual, original investigative reports and accounts on the role played by George All Agate. Because when he was age 26, he surfaced at the office that had been set up by the group claiming to be publishing the East End News. Now, the East End News in 1981 was claimed to be an answer to the then only local newspaper in East London, in Tower Hamlets, East London Idiot. And the main people behind the Eastern News were three or four National Union of Journalists, so called left wingers. They had an internal row within the NUJ bureaucracy, and they wanted to create a alternative, they said, and the alternative should be a left wing one, an answer to the existing right wing East London idiotizer. Now notice this timing. It was the 1981, May 1981, Greater London Council election that restored the Labour Party as the victorious party at the GLC election. And the GLC, which had been until the election controlled by the Conservatives, fronted by Horace Cutler, was defeated by the Labour Party, which was not represented by or led by or fronted by Ken Livingstone, who was a GLC Labour councillor. But it was fronted by successfully Andrew McIntosh. Andrew McIntosh was a right winger, of course, in terms of the Labour Party's kind of narratives. And he came from Haringey, I think, North London anyway. And McIntosh had actually successfully exposed some of the acts of incompetence and failures by the GLC Conservatives under Horace Cutler. Remember, the Horace Cutler leadership was in place in May 1978. Well, that was the day of the election as well, when Al-Tabali was murdered. And it was in power in July 1978 when Ishaq Ali was murdered in Hackney. And the Labour Party in the GLC as opposition really didn't raise the issue in any way significantly as it should have done. We shall be covering all of the Labour Party's role in the GLC and examining again updated in terms of the updated facts, the role of the criminal gang fronted by Ken Livingstone, because McIntosh successfully defeated the Conservative GLC at the election on the 1st of May 1981. And within 24 hours of that election victory, fronted by McIntosh, Ken Livingstone, followed by Francis Immoral and Bryn Davies and a few other self-styled left-wingers in the Labour Party's GLC councillors group, staged a coup and they removed McIntosh as the leader of the Greater London Council that had now been installed as the ruling GLC party. Now that coup was the beginning of the destruction of any democratic representation by the London-wide, what is now the equivalent of the London-wide Greater London Assembly. That was in 1981. And what happened, increasingly, the coup meisters that had actually replaced Andrew McIntosh then set about confronting the Labour government regime fronted by Margaret Thatcher, of course, because she was in her prime. And I decided, I'm the only one who did that, I decided to spend all the available time that I had in visiting the GLC, the county hall, and observing the criminals at work. And one of the things I was doing at that time in May 1981 was also trying to contribute to the East End news. Now, I on one side and all the racists on the East End news on the other side. Think about that. It's not unique, but that is what was happening. When I said that the GLC, whatever the coup meisters were saying about their ambitions, the GLC should be held to account. And the GLC had not been held to account. The biggest housing crisis that people in Tower Hamlets, for example, had been suffering for years was because of the GLC controlled housing policy, which was completely hostile to the needs of the majority of people and negligent of the duties that it owed to people in desperate housing needs. So we should be updating on all of these issues. Now, what happened? The instead of focusing on that, the main priority for the GLC, Greater London Council, it was converted into an opposition to the UK central government fronted by Margaret Thatcher. Ideologically, philosophically, ethically, and morally, I see nothing wrong in doing that. But the reality was that they were then neglecting the primary duties for the existence of the GLC. And Ken Livingston Livingstone increasingly became obsessed psychologically, obsessed with promoting his image, the criminal. And there was nobody at the Guardian, nobody at any other place. I mean, there was no media apart from the Guardian, of course, nationally. There was nothing really, and the so-called Tribune was a joke. And Ted Knight was at Lambeth Council. Not long after that, Ted Knight was the leader of Lambeth Council. Not long after that, and Ted Knight and Ken Livingstone procured allegedly procured money from Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. And on that procured amount of money, they actually produced a thing called the Labour Herald, which has nothing to do with Labour Party's founding objectives, but it was to do with promoting the image of Ken Livingstone and supporting Ted Knight. Now, in order to get all the actual quotes and the actual claims, you have to look at the contents of what they published. And because of the limitations imposed by London libraries on access to archives and newspapers and so on, you can't get ready access to that. So I'm doing what I'm doing entirely based on memory at this point. And I shall be, of course, checking on some of the other things for later elaborations and updates and clarifications. I noticed that Ken Livingstone was holding any number of public events, that is, propaganda press conferences. He would call the Fleet Street people and the national newspapers would give the GLC the status, the importance that they usually would give the central government department. So there is on the basement in the county hall, there was a thing called the press room, the GLC press room. So I would sit there and I would observe various others doing the journalism for the Fleet Street based papers. None of them, including the ones from the Daily Telegraph, of course, none of them was interested. None of these journalists was interested in asking the questions as to how what GLC's leadership, fronted by Ken Livingstone, was doing to address the needs of the people, the voters of Greater London. None of them. The only thing that they actually focused on was anything to do with their statements against Margaret Thatcher. Fine. But that was not good enough as journalism. So that was happening in 1981. And up to the end of the GLC, 6 years later, I stayed routinely, regularly questioner of Ken Livingstone. So, as I said, I interrupted at least several hundred of Ken Livingstone's events. And Livingstone didn't mention that when he was allowed to spiel against me in a piece in The Guardian in March 2000, March 1992. Ken Livingstone, Peter Newsom, and a few other racists quoted against my political activities in the Guardian piece by the Guardian's racist woman who wrote that piece. And I will discuss the Guardian's obligations another time as to what Catherine Vina should do to pay damages and publish apologies and withdraw the lies. But none of the lies that they published against me was anything to do with me making a career or benefiting myself in any shape or form. What they said was that all I was doing was saying things on my own and nobody else was supporting me. That is what Ken Livingstone claimed. Now, who is supporting Ken Livingstone now? Ken Livingstone is out of the Labour Party, and Ken Livingstone is no longer accepted as even a mentionable career political. Same case with the other sleazeballs like Sleazebaz. Now, what Ken Livingstone was doing was painting himself as the anti-racist. When it came to 1983, he declared the GLC anti-racist year or anti-racism year. It has nothing to do with opposing racism, either in the actual behavior of the GLC decision makers or its policy makers, but in the personality of Ken Livingstone appearing before the cameras and saying he was the leader of the anti-racism GLC. I said that cannot be acceptable. That is nothing to do with opposing racism. And I actually caught him lying and caught him unaware of what the publicity leaflets were saying and what he was saying at that particular event that took place on the first floor, what they call the, notice this, socialists calling its principal floor, the elitist name principal floor for the bourgeois socialists. And I caught Livingstone unaware of what this particular leaflet was saying and what he was saying in contrast. And none of the so-called reporters present there was even aware of the things that I was pointing out. So this continued for 6 years. Every meeting, every event that Ken Livingstone organized was a stunt to promote his image as the revolutionary, as the people's leader. Nothing to do with the GLC delivering housing, delivering other policies that affected people's lives every day. And one of the things that Ken Livingstone did was to issue statements that didn't have regional, even London, UK regional kind of priority. He would make statements about China, he would make statements about other countries, India, other countries that had no direct actual brief for the people of London in the context of the GLC's duties. So one right wing Labour GLC member from an Essex constituency, actually Alan Williams, I think I remember this. I'm going back 40 years older. Alan Williams said that, I mean, what on earth is he doing making statements about foreign policy? He's supposed to be talking about London and the people of London and their needs. So the irrelevance of Ken Livingstone Livingstone was only beginning to appear. It became worse by the day. When, for example, he degenerated into attacking a Jewish reporter for the Evening Standard, Oliver Feingold, whose case I have championed right from the beginning because I think he was completely innocent of any charge that Ken Livingstone was laying at him, because Livingstone accused Oliver Feingold as being Jewish. I mean, how could he do that? And Feingold reporter replied that, well, right, we've got you on tape, which absolutely was the case. And as a result of that, Livingstone degenerated every day with every encounter that he had. So if we look at the five, well, if we look at about 5 years of Jeremy Corbyn at the front of the Labour Party in Parliament, what do we find? Because Corbyn was one of the Ken Livingstone supporters. What do we find? There was nothing in Corbyn's actual statements, actual policy making, that actually compensated for or they actually provided an alternative to what Cameron and the Conservatives were providing or offering. And this goes back to the asylum, the boat people, and the racism, and the right wing, and all the rest of it. Corbyn didn't provide an coherent narrative against any of that. And nor did Ken Livingstone. Because what happened with Ken Livingstone, when he found that he could not answer my questions, he immediately adopted a policy of suspending the meeting. So, can you imagine hundreds of meetings over 6 years, let's say? Hundreds of meetings, not mass meetings, but publicity events that he organized to promote his image. I interrupted, but I didn't interrupt by saying anything illegal. I didn't say anything unlawful. I didn't say anything not factual. All I had to do was to raise a question. Full stop. And all Ken Livingstone had to know is that who is the question from? And so he said, right, we stop it. And he would stop it. So what he said to the Guardian in 1992, in March 1992, was that nobody else was supporting me. I mean, it doesn't matter. Why did anybody have to support me? It was my question. I was the one who was interrogating him on the evidence of his misconduct, his lying, and his self promotion. Why did anybody else have to support? He was the one who had to answer, and he couldn't answer, he didn't answer. And it went on like that. So none of this, none of these were reflected in the so called Eastern News. The Eastern News itself was supposed to be an alternative to the East London Idiotizer. The Idiotizer is the name that I gave it. And there were rows between me on the one hand and the racists from the National Union of Journalists. Well, I was a member of the NUJ, but these members of the NUJ were in a group of their own. They were trying to set up the pretense and the pretext that East End News was delivering answers for the people of the East End, and they were doing that as part of their secret plan to argue for the GLC to give funding for that project. But there was absolutely no rigorous reporting by the East End News for anyone reasonably conscious of the contents of the paper or the outlet and the actual reality of lives as being experienced by people in Tower Hamlets. There was there was absolutely nothing. Just like the Stalinist communist Morning Star, which I have given the name Morning Scar because it tells lies. It has got absolutely no relevance to the people of the country, the United Kingdom. So much so that the Morning Sky, if you look around London, which has got 8 million plus people, how many copies of the Morning Star actually get sold? I would say that it cannot be on the news shop, if you like, news agents, it cannot be more than 100, if that. Because I have scoured the whole of Tower Hamlets and Newham. The only place I found yesterday that is still having a copy of the Morning Star is a shop near Aldgate East. So I have to travel quite a significant distance to be able to buy a Morning Star. And it says that yesterday's front page was broken system. I mean, it could be anything. The Morning Star doesn't report on the day to day experience of ordinary people anywhere in the United Kingdom. It's worse than the Pravda of the worst time in the USSR and the Zvestia, the two known outlets in the USSR that I remember is Vestia and Pravda. Liars and their counterparts in the Chinese Cultural Revolution time when Chairman Mao Zedong was in place and horrible things were being done to the innocent, powerless people. Massacres were taking place. So, if you look at day, like the Labour Herald, Ted Knight and Ken Livingston Livingston fronted that. And if you look at today's Morning Scar, and if you look at the right wing kind of status quo, the Times, the Sun, the Daily Mail, there is nothing that separates them when it comes to reflecting and representing the people and their day to day experience. It doesn't matter whether they're ideological right or left. What is there they have in common is that they hold the ordinary people in total equal contempt, which is why the immediate echoing of the conservative excuse after Uxbridge and West Ruislip, South Ruislip, the response by Keir Starmer was that Sadiq Khan should put an end to or pause the very minor, very small scale environmental initiative that he has actually introduced. Starmer was speaking in exactly copying the Conservatives. It's not something I've made up. Starmer said what the Tories had said minutes earlier, as if Starmer had been in consultation with the Conservatives over the Uxbridge and Ruislip by election before the result was officially made public. And he followed in minutes after the Conservatives said that it was Sadiq Khan who lost the election for Labour Party in Uxbridge? Most certainly not, because he came within hundreds of votes. I mean that particular constituency, whatever the actual final kind of representation of borders redrawing, as Rachel Shabib has pointed out earlier, about 2 days ago on the Sky News press preview, that particular seat had not been won by the Labour Party for 50 years. And this time it almost was won by the Labour Party. So it was, if anything, credit due to Sadiq Khan. But Starmer wasn't going to support Sadiq Khan because Starmer is a conservative. So we shall be talking about all of these. So there is this thing about George Alagai, and it's the uniform words that the Times is using, I newspaper is using, the Guardian is using, and the out of London outlets are using about Alagia. When I would sit at the so-called editorial policy meetings at the East End News, Alagia, a 26-year-old, surfaced. He didn't say anything. For the months I was there, the months that this East End News was alive, because it collapsed afterwards, Alaga didn't say a single thing in 1981. How is it that he became transformed into this brave, intellectual, heavy, and a kind person whose death is staged as a passing national event by Naga Manchetti crying on the screen and others crying? This is something that has to be investigated, and we shall be investigating, and it will come to the factual basis that this was made up. Alagaya actually was an inciter of hatred against Muslims. Having been born in Sri Lanka, he didn't really have any experience of living in a Muslim society. Sri Lanka is anti-Muslim anyway. And what he did was, when the attacks on the Muslims based on the incitement, Muslim hatred fronted by Tony Blair and George W. Bush and others arose, Alagate, I call him, chose that would be something that he could do like Trevor Terrible Phillips has been doing. In fact, his book, his so called memoir, is a copy of the kind of model that he has set himself up as a kind of Trevor Terrible Phillips. Can you believe that? And they're claiming that he's intelligent, he's brave, and he's this, that, and the other. And then he invents stories about the life of the black American writer Baldwin, and the alleged conversation that Baldwin had with his father when he told his father, Baldwin Sr., that he, Baldwin, James Baldwin, could do anything that a white person and a white man could do. And his father said that is dangerous because that would destroy him. Now, what is George Alagate trying to tell us? What about the hatred about Muslims that he, Alagaya, spewed and spouted? Now, these obituaries in the Times, in the Guardian, and the I newspaper, etc., are also forgetting the fact that Alagate was not a known reporter of any reference because he didn't do anything at the Eastern News whatsoever. As I said, quite apart from staying silent during the so called policy meetings, where I was on the one side and the rest of them on the other, he found that he couldn't get any jobs or anything because there was no reference in terms of a career profile. He somehow appeared as a recruitee of Altaf Gahar. Altaf Gahar was the chief bureaucrat of the Pakistan military general Ayub Khan. Nothing to do with Alagid. I had two encounters with Altaf Gahar in 1977 and not long after that when he set up this thing called the South. And it was the South that Alagid was recruited for. Alagid had no suitability at all because this man is a Pakistani, Altaf Gawar, former civil servant, chief of the civil service, if you like, for the military regime. So he was quite happy to work with Altaf Gawar, who was not opposing Muslims and not inciting hatred against Muslims. And suddenly he uses that Alagid, that is, as a reference that he worked for the South. And then he manipulates that and edges his way into the BBC somehow, various other routes as well. And when he became certain that he could be staying as a secure careerist at the BBC, he felt confident and he started echoing the anti Muslim incitement of hatred against Muslims. How is it that the Guardian, the Times, the I newspaper, the Daily Mail, and others, they scum as well, all united in praising George Alagit? And none of them is talking about his hatred of Muslims and his role as a terrible Phillips type, mental slave. No mention of Alagit being silent. All the issues that have happened during they are saying his 30 years as a journalist, all the issues to do with racism, racist murders, racist violence, even the issues admitted, admitted by racists like Louis Casey about the London Metropolitan Police. Alagit has no time for any of that. And there are other funny things about him because he kind of says in his memoir that mentally, within his mind, his understanding, his definition of what beauty or attractiveness in a woman was no different from a white person's. That is a most embarrassing kind of confession that he makes in his so called book. I mean, obviously, it is to address the white audience, but that is not making him honest, is it? We shall be talking about all of those in due course in other editions. This is 1 hour and 13 minutes or 14 minutes. Shall be bringing an end to this particular edition.